The following video is a presentation by attorney Mike Vraw of HOMELINE talking to youth about how to rent an apartment for the first time. We missed Mike's introduction but wanted to make the rest of the presentation available. Please enjoy.
Now, those I think are the three starting points for almost everybody when it comes to searching for their first place. Okay. There's also some other things though, like amenities. Now you might be thinking that you want to have a swimming pool at the place that you're living at. Lots of larger apartment buildings do have swimming pools. They have weight rooms or fitness centers. Those kinds of things that are nice to have, maybe certainly not essential, are sort of the unnecessary amenities, at least for most of us. The more necessary amenities, the ones that I'd pay more attention to if I'm in your situation, would be a washer and dryer. Is a very nice amenity. Most people think of it as an amenity, but it's one of those things you have to consider when you're going to live someplace. If you're going to live in a rental, you're going to need to wash clothes somewhere. And there's different levels of that, right? There can be a laundromat somewhere nearby in town, and somehow you've got to get to that laundromat, bring your clothes there and bring them back. That can be a hassle. It takes time, effort, maybe a car, depending on how far it is. Sometimes there's laundry in the facility somewhere. Maybe it's on your floor of the apartment building, or at least in the building somewhere, depending on the type of building you have. Maybe if it's a duplex, it's down in the basement. But a shared laundry facility with other units of some type or amount. Typically, those make you pay though. You might have to pay with quarters or using a key card or something like that. So there's an additional cost that you might not factor in when you're looking at the actual cost that we're talking about for the rental that you'll have. Sort of the gold standard for laundry is to have laundry in your own rental unit. I think when I was starting out, I think I had 4 or 5 apartments before I had my own laundry in my own unit. And it was a big deal. And I understood it was a big deal because I'd lived without it for a long time. You can't leave your clothes in there overnight because somebody else might want to do their clothes. You can't even leave them much longer than when they're done in the washer or dryer because somebody else will want to use those machines likely. And there's theft to consider with that sort of thing as well. Some other sort of top tier amenities that a lot of people look at are air conditioning, which is not required in Minnesota. I think Arizona is the only state that I know of that has any kind of regulation on that. So if you really want air conditioning, if you've got asthma and you know that you're not going to be able to open your window during the summer, you might care about air conditioning quite a bit and might prioritize that. A dishwasher might matter a lot to you. Those are the kinds of things that I'd want you to think about when you're doing your shopping, though, that aren't in the top 3 things that we are looking at. Another thing that I think that you should consider is parking or transportation of whatever type you're going to use. If you're going to use a bus, you're going to use your bike, you're going to use a car. But if you are going to use a car, you need to look and figure out where are you going to park, right? So if you're looking at a place and you meet with the landlord, let's say on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you say, landlord, where am I going to park? I got a car. Where am I going to park my car? And the landlord says, look at all this street parking. It's fine. There's tons of on-street parking. Great. There's tons of on-street parking. But that's 10 in the morning on a Tuesday when people are at work or at school. So is it going to be the same way when cars are actually there? The only way to know is to return to that building when cars are actually there. Go back that same night at 6 o'clock. And there are parts of the city, lots of cities around the metro, where you will see people literally musical chairsing it around the block again and again, hoping that a spot will open up for them to take. So if you're promised on-street parking and there's plenty of it, look at a time when you think it's going to be about as busy as it's going to be, and keep in mind that when the winter comes, that might be even more problematic. Depending on street emergencies, snow emergencies, it might be only half the street that people can park on. So you'd have to double the number of cars for the spots, at least sort of mentally. It's one of the things to consider. And so it's one of the things that people sometimes pay extra for. And I always tell somebody that, look, if you have a place that it is $1,200 a month, no utilities included, no washer and dryer, and no parking, versus a place that's $1,300 and you need to park somewhere, but all the utilities are included. There's a washer and dryer in the unit, and there's free parking thrown in. The $1,300 sounds like it's $100 more, but it might actually be less expensive. Sometimes you have to pay extra for parking, whether it's a garage spot or just a spot in the landlord's parking lot. Things to consider when shopping. Additionally, like I said, 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, chances are it's going to be pretty quiet in that apartment building that you're looking at. One reason to once again swing by on Tuesday night or Wednesday night or whenever to see what the atmosphere is like. Are there tons of little kids running around? And maybe you want that. Maybe you want a ton of little kids running around. You like the noise. Maybe you got a little kid of your own and you want them to have somebody to play with. Fine. But it's something you should consider is what's the environment going to be like when I'm going to be at home? Something people don't always think about, especially when they're shopping for their first place. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about what I think you can afford for a place because that's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, how do you figure it out? How do you calculate what you can actually afford for a rental? Let's start with this. Let's say you're making 15 bucks an hour. There's a lot of places these days that are offering that. Not every place, but many places that are offering $15 an hour. I'm just going to use that as an example. You can scale this down or scale it up depending on whatever wage you're bringing in. But if you're making $15 an hour and you're working full time, that's 40 hours a week, right? There's no overtime thrown in, just a full work week. That means you're grossing, no taxes taken out. You're grossing $600 a month, $600 a week. I'm sorry. Now, almost everybody pays their rent by the month, not by the week. So we're going to figure out what you can afford per month. So you multiply a full week's pay times 4.33 weeks per month, the average number of weeks in a month. And that makes your monthly gross income a little under $2,600. Once again, no taxes taken out. You haven't paid car insurance. You haven't paid for food or clothes or anything like that. But this is a recommendation that the government has that I really think that people shouldn't go above. And that is you don't spend more than 30% of $25.98 on rent or a mortgage payment, which means if you're working $15 an hour for full time, you've got about a little under $800 a month to spend on your own for rent. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you have done any shopping to speak of for a rental or seen what the prices are. I talk to probably between 1,500 and 2,000 people a year myself on our tenant hotline. We have several staff members, but I'm one of the people that does a lot of the calls. And one of the things that we ask everybody that contacts us, because we have to take some demographic information for the people that fund our work, is how much is the rent that you're paying? And if anybody's paying anything under $900 or even $1,000, I'm sort of taken aback these days, especially anywhere in the metro area. We talk to people all around the state, but in the metro area, if somebody's paying under $800, that's shocking. And I'll actually pin them down on it a little bit to make sure that there's not some sort of subsidy involved, that their rent is getting paid partially by the government, which is not an easy thing to get. It takes a lot of time, and it's kind of a list that's getting smaller and smaller all the time. There just aren't that many places under $800 a month, or under $900 a month, or even $1,000 a month. There's all kinds of places that do tabulations on the average rent in the Twin Cities, and I've followed this number since I started doing this work since 1996. For a very long time, between $9 and $950 was the average rent in the Twin Cities, but in the last 7, 8, 9 years, it's shot up substantially. Depending on which charts you look at, the average rent is the average. So some of the places are lower, a lot of places are higher, but the average rent is somewhere between $1,250 and $1,450 in the Twin Cities. That's for an average place. Now, again, if it's smaller, it's going to be a little bit cheaper, but it's going to be neighborhood dependent too. So if it's $1,450 though, how are you going to be able to afford that on $800 a month in money that you can afford for rent? Well, you've got to add roommates, right? If you add 2 roommates, you can afford a place that's $2,300 just with this same $15 an hour salary, a couple coworkers from whatever job you've got. And you might be able to find a 3-bedroom for that. I think you could find a 3-bedroom for $2,300. I think you could find a 2-bedroom for $1,600. And it's going to be an okay place. It's not going to be amazing, but it's going to be pretty nice for $1,600. My point about all of this is I think the single biggest decision you make when it comes to your first rental is who your roommates are going to be, because most people have to get roommates when they start out. I'm a lawyer. My wife is a doctor, and I knew her back when she was just starting out, and she knew me then too. Both of us had multiple roommates over our lives before we got married. I think I probably had 11 different roommates before that happened, and I don't think my story is that uncommon. Most people starting out, you just don't have the financial cushion, the financial ability to be able to get your own place. If you do, great, good for you. But most people have to get roommates probably multiple times, probably multiple different roommates because you move to a different city, your career shifts, whatever. So how do you find a roommate? Because I think this is, like I said, the biggest decision you'll make when it comes to your first place is selecting a good roommate. And there's a lot of ways to try to find roommates. And when I ask people, if this were a live class and we were all sitting around together, I would ask, does anybody know who they want for their roommate? Has anybody actually thought about this and you know who your roommate's going to be when you go get your own place? Somebody would invariably say, I'm going to move in with my friend. And I'd ask them whether it's their best friend or not. And sometimes they'll say it's their best friend, sometimes they won't. But usually that's who it is. Somebody that they really know well, that they've trusted a long time, and they'd probably refer to them as their best friend. That's an option. A romantic partner. I hear that one quite a bit. Move in with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Okay, if that's the plan. A relative, would that make sense? How about a total stranger, right? So let's look at each one of these things and think about what we're talking about and why it's a good idea or a bad idea, or at least the pitfalls that you should think about. First, the best friend. So this is probably the number one answer I get when I'm talking to folks that are in that starting out range, because it's somebody they get along with, right? They like them, they trust them, they know them, and they feel like they can count on them as a roommate in every important regard. Why it's so important, why I think this is the biggest decision you make when it comes to your first place, is because anything your roommate does wrong, you're responsible for as well, just like in a lot of ways, like you did it. Now, if your best friend roommate is selling drugs out of your place, that doesn't mean you're going to go to jail if they go to jail. Different question. But you might both get evicted if they're selling drugs out of your place, as if you were one of the people selling the drugs as well. That does happen. If they don't pay their half of the rent and you pay your half of the rent, you might get evicted because they didn't pay their half of the rent, and you might actually owe their rent to the landlord still, even though you paid your half. Now you could always chase your roommate for that money, but good luck trying to get that money if they're actually doing that at that point. So the best friend, when we get calls on our tenant hotline, because we get calls about every one of these types of roommates on our tenant hotline, where people say, hey, I had this roommate, things went bad, what do I do next? When we get calls about pretty much all of these roommates, it's very early in the rental process. What I mean by that is most people sign a 1-year lease. That's how most landlords work in Minnesota. They like the 1-year lease, usually in the warm weather months between April and October. That's when they want people to move in, and you sign a 1-year lease. And then maybe you stick around for another year after that, or you go month to month after that. Most people start with a 1-year lease. And we don't get calls from people about roommate problems 10 months into a 12-month lease. We just don't. There's 2 months left. The light's at the end of the tunnel. You know it's going to be over. Everybody's going to separate. It's going to be done. We get calls from people 3 weeks in, 2 months in. That's the range we get those calls. I can't believe I moved into this person. This isn't working out. And with the best friend, I can tell you the stories that we get routinely. It always starts with this one thought that people have. That's my best friend, so they're not going to be mad that I do X, right? And I'll tell you the X's here. Option one, you figure out some sort of cleaning system. It's my turn to clean this week. Next week, it's your turn to clean, whatever. Or it's your day, whatever. It's your day to do the dishes, my day to do the dishes the next day. However you want to sort it out. But at some point, one of you says, oh, I know it's my turn to clean, but I don't want to, and I'm busy. And they're my best friends, so they're not going to mind. They're my best friends, so it won't be a problem. That thought is what leads to trouble. Sometimes if you have very different schedules, this can be a mess, right? If you have a job where you work nights, you get done at 1 in the morning in the service industry, and you don't get home till 1:30, but you got to unwind a little bit. Sometimes you like to even have friends over after that shift is over from work, maybe. But your best friend roommate has to go to work at 7 in the morning, so they got to get up a few hours later. That's going to maybe work for a night or two, but at some point there's going to be a blow up. And I'm not saying you can't juggle the schedules, but you've got to be very respectful of each other if you don't have the same type of schedules. But those types of mixed schedules can be a mess if there is not a lot of communication about it. Probably the single biggest killer of the best friend roommate relationship is one of you loses a job. And you go to the best friend roommate and you say, I'm really trying to do this on my own. I don't want to ask my parents or whoever you were staying with before for any help financially. I know you have this really good job and you can afford to cover my rent for a month or two. Can you cover me? I'll pay you back. I promise I will pay you back, but can you cover my rent this month and maybe next month? That kind of request, a real request for real money. I'm not talking about $5 at Taco Bell because you forgot your wallet. I'm talking about a real request for hundreds of dollars will almost certainly actually end a friendship. Having done this a long time, if you ever run into that, I would bet, whether you loan the money or not, that the friendship is over within a year. It's a real risk to a friendship. My advice for anybody ever thinking of moving into the best friend is, you've decided to risk the friendship. You should know that going in. One day you're best friends. The next day, you're both signing a document, a binding legal document, where you're agreeing to be essentially co-signers for each other for a $12,000 to $15,000 contract. Best friends one day, $12,000 to $15,000, business partners the next day that you both signed. So it can be a huge strain on a best friendship. To be fair, sometimes it works out. In fact, I think it works out a lot. But when it doesn't work out, it destroys the friendship. It seems to do that. We don't get calls, interestingly, from people that move into their best friends when it's their second rental. It's when it's their first rental that it seems to be a problem for them. They don't really know what they're doing as a renter, right? It's your first time out there, and you're probably going to make some mistakes, and they probably will too. And whether or not you can get through it as a friend is the question. So it might work out, but it does risk the friendship, and it's something to keep in mind. Next up, the romantic partner. Okay. Oh, I've been seeing them for a long time now, and I know that they're the one. This is going to work out. Okay, that's great. I hope you're right. But what if it doesn't? What if you break up? Again, it's very different to be in a relationship where you're not living together versus living together. That's a massive transformation in a relationship, right? But if you get a 1-year lease and you break up a month or two into the lease, what happens to the contract? Short answer, nothing. The contract's still there. Both of you still have the right to live there. And that can be, as you can imagine, a real mess. If you want to move in with a romantic partner, like I mentioned earlier, most landlords want you to sign a 1-year lease. However, there are many landlords that will let you go month to month. You'll have to pay more. Instead of $1,200 a month, it might be $1,250 or even $1,300 a month to go month to month. But if you break up, you can give notice and maybe move out the end of the next month or 2 months later, whatever. But it's not all 12 of the months. It's a thought to keep in mind when you decide to move in with a romantic partner. And I'd recommend it, again, especially in the first place that you're getting together. A lot of times people will say, I'm going to move in with my brother or my sister. I've grown up with them. I've lived with them before. They know what I'm like. I know what they're like. We're not going to have those cleaning problems because we're both slobs, right? We're not going to have the schedule problems because I know their schedule. We've had all the fights we needed to have. They're already out of our system. So that's taken care of. And I'll say, in some ways, this is the safest choice of the three that I put on the screen so far. But in another way, it isn't. And I'll tell you why. Somewhere, somehow, somebody was the referee when there was a problem between you and the brother or sister, right? I don't know if it was a parent or some guardian or somebody would step in when it was necessary. I guarantee you, let's say it was mom. I guarantee that if mom was the referee before, mom is not going to want to settle the who drank the last milk and didn't get more milk in the fridge argument when you move to your own place. I've done my time. That's what mom's going to say. I've done my time. Go to any apartment where you've got a lot of roommates living together and open up the fridge or the cupboards, and you're likely to see weird, different colored tape all around, or arrows pointing in different directions with signs saying whose stuff is what, because this is a disputed issue and people get mad about it. If you wake up in the morning and you got a big day and you need those frosted flakes to make your day start, right? Or you need that coffee to get it going, and you've counted on it. You even looked last night to make sure that it was there. You got it all set, and you wake up the next day and it's gone. You're going to be mad because it just sets the whole day in the wrong direction. And so, like I said, I think on some levels this is a safer choice than a lot of others, but there are some inherent risks built into moving in a brother or a sister. So I told you a couple minutes ago, you got to get a roommate, right? You're not going to be able to afford this on your own, most likely. So you have to get a roommate, but then I've sort of talked you out of all the options. I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to give you the pros and cons. But a total stranger, is that who you should move in with? No, I don't think that that's the best choice. Although sometimes people sort of find themselves in that situation, especially if they're moving to a new city and you don't know anyone, but you can't afford a place on your own. If I was writing a prescription for you guys going out to get your first place, who your roommate should be, I think the ideal roommate is somebody that you know a little. Maybe your friends know a little bit too, but you need to get to know them because you really do have one goal, which is to get through 1 year with them. After that first year, roommate problems really go down for people. It's first year roommate problems that we see. There's some more of that as well. There's domestic abuse, which can happen anytime during somebody's life, but most of the roommate calls we get are in the first year that people are living in a place together with other people. And so you're trying to live through a year with this new roommate or roommates. And if it takes you a little time to get to know them, maybe it'll take you 2, 3, 6 months before you realize, oh, I thought I knew this person. I thought I liked him a little bit, but I really don't. Maybe I might even hate him. I'm not sure. But you only have 6 months to go at that point because it might take you that long to figure it out. You'll find that people are willing to impose on each other more if it's somebody you really know well, the brother or sister or the best friend or the romantic partner. And you might step on each other's toes a lot quicker. Whereas if it's somebody that you need to get to know, you might have more of a respectful distance for longer. And then getting to that year end is a lot shorter. So that would be my advice is how do I get to that year? What's my best shot for maximizing my chances of success in that vein? Okay, let's move on to the application process. All right, so we're not even getting your keys yet in the conversation that I'm having, but this is the important stuff, sort of thinking about it in advance. The application process is unlike anything you've ever done, I would assume. Landlords actually run background checks on you. This probably isn't a big surprise to you. You've probably heard about this before. Most landlords these days charge somewhere between $20 and $50 per adult to apply, right? Just to try to get the place. Doesn't mean you're going to get the place, just to try it. If they turn you down, you don't get the money back. If they say yes to you, the money doesn't get applied to your rent or anything. You're out this money, so you're risking it. And this is what landlords generally are looking at. Your rental history. What they really care about there are some landlords that won't rent to you if you don't have any rental history, but that's not most landlords. Most landlords don't actually rule you out for that. They do rule you out, however, if you have a lot of, if you have a lot of evictions on your record, or any evictions actually, is what they don't want to see. An eviction is where a landlord took you to court and convinced a judge that you should have to move. In fact, a lot of landlords don't even care whether you won or lost the eviction case. Just the fact that it was filed against you. Cost landlords $300 to file evictions. They don't do it lightly. And so other future potential landlords really hold that against prospective applicants. So that's the first thing that most landlords look at is, do you have any evictions on your record? Next up is going to be your criminal record. Now this varies quite a bit actually, what landlords will look at from place to place. Some landlords only care about felonies for a certain amount of time. Some only care about misdemeanors for a certain amount of time. Some look at specific types of crimes, like any kind of drug crime they'll hold against you more, or sexually related crime they'll hold against somebody a lot longer. But this is one of the things that they look at as well. Next up, they look at your credit. I don't know, I can't see your faces. I don't know how old everybody is in this setting. If you're 18 and you're an adult in this country, chances are you have a credit rating, whether you know that or not, whether you want one or not. You probably have a credit rating. Now, credit is, it's a nationally recognized reputation about every adult in this country, like I said, and it tries to answer one question, credit scores do. And that is, do you pay your bills on time? That's it. Some people will talk about how it's kind of a mystically figured out number. There's actually a number that you get. That's how most credit scores are done. The worst you can have is 350, and the highest credit you can have is 850. The higher the number, the better. I don't know why it doesn't go from 0 to 500. I didn't pick. They started at 350, it goes to 850. Anyhow, a lot of landlords will say you have to have 550 or 575 or 600 or 625, 650, whatever. They'll have a requirement, a minimum number that you have to have. And what credit is trying to answer about all of us is, do you pay your bills on time? And having something like a cell phone plan where you pay a bill there can build up good credit. If you don't pay that cell phone bill, that can be bad credit. Utilities that you're supposed to pay, car loan payments, things like that can start to chip away at your credit or make your credit look good. Credit matters in so many ways throughout this country. If you want to get car insurance, you'll actually pay more if you have bad credit. Is that fair? You can argue about that, but it's what it is. You'll pay more. Some employers won't hire you if you have bad credit. And I talk to people sometimes who say, "Oh, I'd rather have bad credit than no credit at all," which is a nice phrase, probably fit on a bumper sticker if you wanted to do that, but it's not really how I'd view this. No credit can be, you can create credit. That's not that hard to do. You can go to Target or someplace like that and get a credit card there with a really low minimum or low credit limit on it. Maybe you can charge $100 or $200 at Target, and you only use it to buy stuff you're going to buy anyway, milk or Frosted Flakes or whatever you're going to buy, and then you pay it off each month. Your credit's going to get good really fast. Where people get into trouble with credit is they think that a credit card, for instance, means a credit limit, right? If you have a credit card from MasterCard or Visa for a $2,000 credit limit, you might think, well, I should go get $2,000 worth of stuff, right? Which is what a lot of people that are between 18 and 20 have done historically. And the problem with that is that you got to pay it back. How credit card companies generally make their money is through interest. They'll charge you 20% interest around that for an interest rate, which is, trust me, a ripoff, an absolute ripoff for you. And the reason why people do this is because they want to get stuff or they need to get stuff today. They don't have the money for it, so they use their credit card for it. And then they pay it back over time, $50 a month, the minimum payment, or whatever the minimum payment might be. But then they're paying the interest, and it's really hard to even get caught up with that. So be careful with credit, but it is important to try to develop credit in this country because it matters in so many ways. It opens doors or the doors get closed because you have bad credit, but it's something to be aware of. And again, if you have no credit at all, if you really believe that, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you have no credit at all, that's not terrible. You can build credit. It's a lot easier to fix no credit than it is to fix bad credit. The last thing that most landlords are going to look at is your income. Can you afford the place? That's really what they're looking at to try to decide whether they want to give you the keys to this place that might be worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? I mean, you're going to pay $15,000 for an average place over the course of a year. Do they want to give you the keys? And they're going to make sure that they think that your present income is going to be enough to cover it. Now, if you're in school and you get student loans and you get a payment twice a year or 3 times a year, they're going to understand that, especially if it's in a college area. But otherwise, they're going to look and see what your paychecks look like. What do you get paid every 2 weeks or every month, however you get paid? And so recent pay stubs, bringing those along when you're applying are going to be pretty important. I will mention that as well, the actual meeting with the landlord. These are what landlords use to look at people officially, but they also like to do interviews. Still, most landlords do. There are a growing number of places where you don't meet the landlord before you actually get the place. You just sort of pick it out online and submit your application, and then they approve you or not. But a lot of landlords still like to look you in the eye and decide if they want to rent to you. That interview is really important, just like a job interview is really important, and you should treat them the same, would be my advice. You really want to get this place. You want to have your independence. You want to be on your own. Show up as good as you can for that interview. Show up on time. Be clean. Shower the night before or that morning, whatever it is you do. Wear decent clothes. Treat it like a job interview. Make sure that your phone isn't making noises during the middle of the call, whether it's a text or a vibration or an actual call, whatever. You don't want to have that being an interruption. You want to feel like you're devoting your complete attention to that landlord at that moment. The reason why is there's not enough places. Rentals are actually quite competitive, especially if you're talking something under $1,000. If a landlord runs an ad for a place that's $800 a month, they're going to get 100 people lined up trying to get it. And they got to rule out 99 of them. And if you're looking at your phone the whole time, they're just going to say, I'm going to move on to somebody who's actually interested in the place. You don't seem to be. It can cost you a place, just like it would cost you a job in a job interview. Treat it like a job interview. That'll maximize your chances of success. Now, I don't think you need to wear your best stuff. You don't have to wear a tuxedo or a prom dress or whatever. But whatever your most decent clothes are, unless you're on your way to work and you're wearing a uniform, I'm fine with that. I think that makes it look responsible there. But other than that, try to put your best foot forward with clothing, with the way you're speaking. Like I said, being on time matters to a lot of people. Try to maximize your chances. How much is it going to cost just to move in to this first place that you want to get? It's an important question. How much do you have to save up? We're going to use the average somewhere between the $1,250 and the $1,450 that I talked about earlier, $1,350. Let's use that. The landlord will never give you the keys to the place unless you've got the first month's rent in advance. That makes sense. Next up, you're going to have to pay a security deposit. I'm going to talk more about those in a little bit, but that's money that the landlord holds on to. They're supposed to give it back when you move out if you paid everything you were supposed to, like rent and utilities, and you didn't damage the place, right? It's contentious some of the time, but there you go. You're going to have to pay an application fee, maybe for two of you. So that's probably going to be another $100 roughly. So this is kind of a starting out average. How much money do you have to save just to get the keys? $2,800. Now, the $1,350, that first month's rent, that's prepaid rent. You don't have to pay it again, right? So it's already prepaid. So that comes out of the $2,800. You're getting, possession is what you're getting for that. But the security deposit, you're not going to get that back for another year. So it's really not in your pocket anymore. It's not being something that you can use whenever you want to apply it for rent. All I'm trying to show you is that even though you want to get a place, you might not be ready until you've saved up enough money to get past this first step. Do you have enough money saved up to be able to get the keys, to qualify for the keys? On to leases themselves. So a lease it's a contract, right? Almost every landlord in the metro certainly will require a written lease. Not every landlord. Again, on our tenant hotline, 5, maybe 7% of the leases throughout the state are handshake deals. I think that number's probably gone down in the last 10 years. Maybe it's 4 to 6%. There are still some landlords, but most want you to sign a lease. And in some ways it's better for you. In other ways it's not, but they're going to require it anyway. So you should be expecting a lease to be necessary. Things that I'd look at: guest limits. Leases say who gets to live there. We talked about significant others earlier. And a lot of the time we'll see people that are facing evictions because they have the boyfriend or girlfriend move in with them. What does move in mean? Well, it's going to depend on what the lease says. Leases will define an unauthorized occupant sort of over the limit. 72 consecutive hours might be the cap. No more than 14 nights in a year or 4 nights in a month. Read the limits. You should understand what they are. I've seen people that know that they have a guest coming. Hey, my sister from the East Coast is going to come stay with me this summer for 3 weeks. Is that okay? And then they write it in the lease, right? So the landlord knows that they're coming. The tenant's told them, there's no surprise, and then nobody gets in trouble over that. The truth is that a lot of times people have somebody move in with them, and there's not really an official move in. There's no declaration. You don't hold a press conference. Hey, we've decided to move in together. It's not like that unless you're really famous, I guess. And even those folks don't really say that out loud. A lot of times the relationship's going well and somebody's over a night a week, and then it's 2 nights a week, and maybe it's 4 nights a week. I'll warn you, the minute you see possessions starting to show up at your place that aren't yours, that it's a toothbrush can mean a lot more than somebody wants to keep their teeth clean. It might mean they're moving in. Again, whether a conversation happens or not, keep an eye out for that sort of thing, because then it's probably time to have a conversation. You can get evicted for this. Landlords do evict for unauthorized occupants. It's not the main reason they evict, but they absolutely do evict for unauthorized occupants because they haven't done the background check. They don't know who it is, and they have a right to do that on anybody living in the place. You might care about a pet. Most landlords, if they allow pets, not all landlords allow pets, but if they do, they might charge something. Pet rent, $50 a month for a dog, $25 a month for a cat, kind of the going rate, or a pet deposit. Dogs usually $500, cats $250. Not all landlords will allow pets at all, but if they do, they'll probably charge you something, and you'll want to figure that out. Most landlords will actually put this sort of thing in their ad. The guest limits, you won't see it in the ads on Craigslist or Housing Link or wherever you're looking, but the pet rules, they typically will list that. You're going to want to confirm all the costs. I don't mean a key like a physical key that you'd use, although I do know some landlords that charge for keys, and then you pay a key deposit up front. But what I'm talking about here is how much is the rent, How much are the utilities? Hey, how much were the utilities last year for people that were living there? Can you show me the old utility bills? You have some sense when you're trying to plan a budget what you can actually afford. Are there any other fees that the landlord is planning to charge or requires you to pay? We talked about parking, laundry costs if you're going to have to pay to use laundry on site. Think about all the costs you're going to incur for living there, as much as you can think of, but those really are the big ones that might come up. All right, now we're going to talk about you've moved in. So we're at a different point in the conversation. You moved in and you have some questions about your rights versus sort of the starting out process. When can the landlord use their key to enter the rental unit? Because the landlord will have a key, right? They're the owner of the property. You're paying to live there, but they have a key. They own it, right? Well, the landlord can't come in unless they have a reasonable business purpose to enter. Makes sense. And they have to try to warn you that they're coming in. We still get between 600 and 1,000 calls a year on this topic on our tenant hotline. As you can imagine, it's very contentious. People are upset because the landlord came in, there's the caretaker in the kitchen fixing something under the sink, and you come out of the shower wearing a towel, and there they are, and it freaks you out because it should. The landlord's supposed to warn you that they're coming in. That's what the law says. Many areas of the law simply override whatever the lease might say. There are leases out there that say the landlord can come in whenever they want during regular business hours, but the law overrides that. The state law does. And that's honestly a reason why a place like ours is in existence, is so we can explain to people as issues come up, hey, this is what's going on. Where I work, by the way, it's a free tenant hotline. People call us or email us with questions about their rentals, and we try to answer whatever we can. On to evictions. This is a big deal. We want to make sure you don't get kicked out of this place that you're living, because not only do you lose that home, but it makes it harder for you to rent places in the future, much harder. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first thing that most prospective landlords look at when they're deciding how to do their screening, who to rent to, is have you had an eviction filed against you before? And the first reason why landlords file evictions is the number one reason by far. Well over 9 out of 10 evictions are filed for this reason in Minnesota. Non-payment of rent is why landlords file evictions. The rent is late when the lease says it's late. A lot of leases will say that the rent is due on the 1st, but there's no late fee until the 5th. The rent is still actually due on the 1st. And if you want to keep your good credit up and convince future prospective landlords to rent to you, paying by the 1st would be what you'd want to do, not the 5th. The simple fact that the late fee doesn't kick in until the 5th doesn't mean that it wasn't due on the 1st. So look at that. Now, landlords don't run down and file evictions on the 2nd of the month, although they could legally. But it does help when they're giving a reference for you later. And like I said, building up that good credit, it's a good habit. Especially the saddest thing is when you see people that actually have the money, but they wait during that grace period to pay it, not realizing that can have a bad effect on them. So pay your rent when it's due. Number 2 is something called holding over. Your lease is for a year. After the year, the landlord doesn't want to renew the lease. They don't have to. There's a couple exceptions. They can't retaliate against you for calling a city inspector because the conditions were bad, or they're discriminating against you. They notice that your new significant other's, in their mind, the wrong race, and they don't want that person around there anymore. So they give you a notice to vacate because you've got friends coming around that they don't like. Might be a discrimination complaint. Other than that, the landlord can say, hey, we had a 1-year deal. It's not a lifetime contract. I don't want to renew it. And if you refuse to go, they'd file an eviction for what's called holding over. It's not a very common reason. Next up is the bad behavior. This is mostly criminal stuff. Any amount of any illegal drug, a grain of marijuana left in the ashtray from when your friend was over 2 weeks ago is enough to get you evicted. How the landlord would find out about that is if the police ever get called out for an argument and they see an ashtray, they're likely to take the ashtray, dump the contents into a bag, take it with them, run it through a lab. And if it turns out there's any marijuana, they might tell the landlord about that. In fact, most police departments around the metro do have ongoing relationships with landlords where they'll send them a weekly or monthly summary of all the reasons why they were called out. Guns is illegal weapons, sawed-off shotguns, automatic weapons. You've been convicted of a felony. There's actually a list of guns that are illegal in that regard. Contraband is possession of stolen property is what it's referring to there. This is part of every lease, whether it says so or not, built into the state law. Next up, we have other breaches of the lease. The ones that are common are, like we talked about this earlier, the unauthorized occupant, having a pet when you're not supposed to, noise. We don't see a lot of evictions for noise. There's a lot of threats of evictions for noise, but if there is an eviction for noise, it's typically somebody that's 18 to 20 years old. If you're going to have loud parties, you got to figure out a way to have communication with your neighbors. Nobody ever gets evicted for noise unless the neighbor complains to the landlord or the police. That's when you see evictions for noise. Now, how could you prevent that? Well, one way you could do that is you'd let your neighbors know, your immediate neighbors, hey, I'm going to have some friends over Saturday night, and we're going to try to keep it down. But if it gets too late and it's too loud, just give me a quick text. Just text me and let me know, and we'll wind it down. We're planning to be done by midnight at the latest, but if it lingers on, let me know if it's a problem, and we'll shut it down. Now, you might be thinking, I don't want to give my phone number to a stranger. Well, they already know where you are. It's not like they really need to stalk you to find you if that's your concern. All you've done is you've given them a way to solve this problem if it comes up, instead of calling the police or because that's who they'll call. At 1 a.m, if they're trying to sleep and they can't, they're going to want us to take action. And one of the actions you can give them to take is to contact you instead of the landlord or the police. So that's one way to deal with that if you think you're going to be making a lot of noise. Smoking in a non-smoking building. Yep, people get evicted for that. I don't know the percentage of buildings in the metro that are non-smoking, but it's growing all the time. Maybe it's as high as 25% now, not sure. Landlords like to go non-smoking. It's better for their insurance. There's less wear and tear on the place. And a lot of people insist on that as customers. I want to be in a building that's non-smoking. All right, our last topic, deposits. This is actually the number one reason first-time renters call us, is trying to get a security deposit back. I talked about that earlier. Usually it's a full month's rent that we're talking about. That's a lot of money that's at stake. It's supposed to come back to you. As mentioned, the landlord can only take money out of your deposit for money that you owe, like rent or utilities, or for damage beyond ordinary wear and tear. So here's a piece of advice that I'd really love for you to remember. If you don't remember much of anything else that I said today, some guy on a screen that claims to be a lawyer, I am, but you don't know me. Anyhow, the day you move into your first place, I want you to document the condition. Now, some landlords will have you sign a page where you check things off, but that's not usually enough in my mind for the tenant. You're going to feel rushed. The landlord's going to be standing there, maybe tapping the notepad with their pen saying, come on, come on, come on, let's go, let's go. What I want you to really do is walk around with a phone or a camera and take pictures of anything you see that's wrong, right? Look in the troubled areas, the oven. I guarantee you the last day you're there, when the landlord's looking at the conditions, they're going to look in the oven. Look in the fridge. Take a picture of the weird orange colored rust stain in the bathtub. Look at all the windows. If there are blinds, look at the blinds, make sure they all work. But the big money when it comes to security deposits is on the floor. If it's tile, are there any chips or breaks in the tile? If it's wood floors, any deep scratches, but especially carpet. Any stains, rips, tears, cigarette burns in the carpet, get good up close pictures of those. Those are going to be your before pictures. The last day you're in your rental, maybe a year later, 2 years later, you cleaned up, you've moved everything out, you're going to take pictures again. And these pictures are going to be a little different. They're going to be the overall photos, 5 or 10 pictures in each room showing the overall condition of the place as you're leaving. Those before and after pictures could be worth $1,500 to you. And I'm not exaggerating. Those pictures typically are the difference between a good and a not as good case in small claims court, which is where these cases end up. By far the most common reason tenants sue landlords is for this reason, trying to recover a security deposit. And if you have photos, your odds, I help a lot of people do this. People that go to court with pictures, the before and after pictures, especially 80, 90% of the time they win. Now, they never would have gone if they didn't think they had a good case, right? If they thought it was fair, they probably wouldn't have contested it. But they think they have a good case, plus they've got this video evidence. You might not ever need the pictures, but if you have them in your phone or on your hard drive or whatever, at least you've got them if you need them. So those before and after pictures could be worth $1,500 to you. And that's really not an exaggeration. Okay, I'm sorry. I went for most of the time, but I didn't see any questions popping up in the chat, but I'm open to take whatever questions anybody has right now.
Yeah, I did not see any questions as well. I still want to give it a little bit of time if people do have questions.
Well, that's why I talk nonstop, Hunter. I mean, that's what lawyers do. Just
Yeah,
press play and a lawyer talks for an hour. Look at that.
here we go.
Yeah.
So we got to, let's begin. So if something breaks, should you be the person? Should the tenant be the person to fix it?
I'm generalizing here, but no. One of the great things about renting is that you can budget your year. Where I live right now, my wife and I, we own our house. If our water heater goes out, we have to pay to fix it. If the furnace breaks, we have to pay to fix it or maybe replace it. When you're renting, you don't. If the water heater breaks, it's the landlord's job to fix it. Or if the furnace goes out, you don't have to pay to repair it. That's one of the great things about renting is you can plan your budget. It's pretty static throughout the year. And let's say you tried to fix the water heater. I am not a handy guy at all. If I tried to fix the water heater that broke, I can almost guarantee I'm going to make it worse and probably have to replace it instead of being able to have it repaired by somebody that's an expert. And you're going to be responsible if you make it worse. So if there's a repair problem, which by the way is generally the number one reason people call us, first time renters, it's security deposits, but in general, it's repairs. Tell the landlord about it first, maybe a text, maybe a phone call, follow it up with something in writing, like an email soon after that. And if they don't push or if they don't solve the problem, get in touch with where I work, HOMELINE, or a place like us, and we'll walk you through the steps that are possible. But in general, no, you shouldn't fix it on your own. And you certainly won't get paid back for it if you do. There's no repair and deduct is what we call it in Minnesota.
Sweet, thank you for that. And then one other question we have in the chat. So when a roommate is wanting to end their lease early, I think, how would you approach that? So
there's not many ways that a roommate can get out of a lease if the other roommate isn't okay with it. Let's say there's two roommates. What we have there is a three-party contract. Roommate one, roommate two, and the landlord. If anybody wants to change the contract, roommate two wants to move out. Roommate one has to agree to it, as does the landlord. All the parties have veto power over any changes to a contract. So it's not easy. Now, this happens, right? Roommates move on, they need to move, whatever. Sometimes they can find a replacement roommate and everybody's okay with the change to the contract. But it's not easy to simply say, hey, you know what? I want out of my lease. I'm tired of this place as a roommate and I'm not going to pay any more rent and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Well, they can't make you stay, but you might still owe rent through the end of the lease. Could be the legal situation. There's some exceptions to that if you join the military or you get called up or transferred. Again, domestic abuse plays a role here. Other than that, not really. You can't force your way out as a roommate if you're in one of these three-party contracts or more. Maybe there's more roommates. But again, one of those things where it makes sense to talk to somebody like me. And once again, where I work, it's a free service. I'm not getting a percentage or a commission here, but you're welcome to look us up and we'll talk to you.
thank you, Mike. I don't think there's any other questions. And I know you said you needed to take off right at 5.
I've got one last question. So in that situation where a roommate wants to leave early, can you sublease?
Yeah, but probably only with the permission of the landlord. Most leases these days require the written permission of the landlord in order to sublet. The landlord's going to want to do a background check on the new tenant, right? And the remaining roommate would probably want to have some approval power over the new replacement roommate as well. Again, all three parties in that contract have to agree to the change if there's going to be a change, or else the contract remains like it was. Everybody's locked into the deal. So it can happen and it does happen. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just the one who wants to leave doesn't get to dictate the terms. That's all.
Is it all right, Mike, if we share your contact information in our one sheet?
Absolutely. Sure.
Sounds good.
Most importantly, though, would be our tenant hotline. And I'll just tell you the number right now since in fact, I'll just write it in here. Because I'm not always available. And so we have several attorneys that work in our office along with law students as well. This is the best way to reach HOMELINE is to call the tenant hotline.
Perfect. We'll send that out too.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today, Mike. And if anyone has any other questions, we'll include Mike's email in our one sheet as well that we send out.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.